Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second RDI's Insights conversation, and this time it's called Yours Truthfully. So I'm Morag Myerscough, and I'm an RDI, and I am delighted to introduce our conversationalists, Michael Wolff and Malcolm Garrett, two innovators from the world of graphic communication. I'm sure you know quite a lot about both of them, but I'm just going to do a little bit of introduction. So Michael Wolff was co-founder of one of the world's most influential design consultancy, Wolff Olins, with clients from Apple Records to Volkswagen or Audi to Citibank. Michael originally trained at the Architectural Association, but moved into exhibition and product design, later pursuing interior design before settling on graphic design. He now runs Michael Wolff and Company and lectures around the world. And Michael's got loads and loads and loads of things to say in between there, but that's just a tiny little bit. And now we're on to Malcolm Garrett. Malcolm earned his reputation and influence during the 1970s pop culture explosion in Manchester, where he designed many iconic album covers for Buzzcocks, Duran Duran, and Boy George, and many more. He was one of the pioneers of introducing the digital studio, where he championed interaction and digital communication. He is the creative director of the design consultancy Images & Co.
Thank you. Well, hello. It's funny to say hello to people you can't see, but that's what I'm going to have to do. It's very kind of you to come and watch and listen. And I am now going to start off with a quote by Bernard Shaw, which has sort of, I knew it a long time ago, but it's kind of guided me. He says, life isn't about finding yourself, life is about creating yourself. And I find that that is the case when I'm working with my clients. I'm not helping them to find who they are. I'm encouraging them to create who they are if they haven't done that already. And quite a lot of people that I work for haven't. So the first thing I'm going to say to you is that in my life, which has gone on for decades, I found there are two kinds of businesses. There are centrifugal businesses, which, as you can see on the screen, they're businesses that start with a vision and they go out into people's lives. And there are centripetal businesses that really are pretty much self-serving. And I think you all know what that means. They just care about their shareholders and making money, and not a great deal about anything else. So this is a coat of arms, and it was presented to me by three members of London Council. So one was Hampstead, one was St Pancras, one was Holborn, and they had come in to see us to say that they were merging and they wanted to find a new name. And it was one of those meetings where we were in Parkway, Camden Town, and I remember thinking, Camden Town, Camden. So I said, well, why don't you call yourselves Camden? Literally, it took 3 minutes. And they said, yeah, that's good. We'll call it Camden. So it was the quickest piece of persuading I think I've ever experienced. But then they said, what's it going to look like? Do we use what the College of Heralds have done for us and showed us this thing? Well, now, I mean, most people haven't a clue what a coat of arms is saying. There's only one I've ever seen, only one, apart from the Royal Standard, that I think is brilliant and expresses itself, because it's for Tynemouth and they make their money out of fishing and mining. And I don't think you could have and that says treasures of the deep in Latin underneath. It's a shame it's in Latin, but it's a terrific coat of arms, I think. Anyway, they agreed to Camden. They then said, what's it going to look like? And we said, it's going to look like what we can do in 2 weeks, and it'll cost you £500. Unbelievably cheap. And it was fine. And they agreed to it. And we asked them what the main thing they wanted to achieve. And they said, this is to do with the truth, I suppose. They said, we want people to understand what we do for them, because at the moment, nobody can see what the council is doing. So we produced a very bright color and a symbol which, is supposed to indicate voting and sharing and all those kinds of things, but it was called the elephant's footprint by the local newspaper. Anyway, it's a symbol that's worked for them, and it's still working for them. But unfortunately, they're no longer orange. They've gone into sort of local authority green and effectively have disappeared. So in other words, the brief we originally had doesn't appear to be true anymore. Anyway, that is Camden. I thought one of the nicest things were these antiquated dust carts. And you can see something about the date here, the name of that rover, and a lovely guy with a cigarette in his mouth, who was very suspicious of me taking that photograph. And that's the symbol. And then we moved to another borough, because once we'd done Camden, we got all sorts of inquiries from different boroughs. And this was for Southwark. And what we did for Southwark, because it's an inner London borough, was we used to have sparrows in London. We don't have them anymore. So these were sketches by Ken Lilly. And Southwark had a sparrow, and we called their local paper the Southwark Sparrow. The most significant thing that we did with Southwark, again, it's talking about the truth. They had forms, which God knows who wrote them, but most of them were very hard to understand. And we had one which was a rent rebate form, and it had this question: please give details of all other persons who occupy the premises you or your husband, wife occupies. A dreadful sentence. And we changed it to who else lives with you. And then they were very excited about that. And I asked them how many forms they'd have that we could rewrite for them. And they said 1,500 or something, so it never happened. But I think a lot of councils could use writers to express their affection and care for people and why they want to know things much more effectively. So that was Southwark. Quickly on to the next project. This was a company that was run by a man who used to go into unhealthy family businesses and rescue them. And this unhealthy family business was called Hadfields. And the reason for the fox was that the paint business was dominated by three huge companies: ICI with Dulux, Crown, and a third German one, Berger, I think. Anyway, because they felt they were being hunted, we thought we would use the truth of them being hunted and use an animal that epitomized in people's minds the idea of being hunted. So we used this fox, which was drawn by, I can't remember his name, a Royal Academician. I thought it was a wonderful fox. And it was one of the few times when I presented a scheme to the board of a company and they've suddenly burst out in applause. So that was quite something. This was telling the truth for a model maker for whom accuracy was the whole point of their business. And since accuracy was the whole point of their business, we found the most accurate scale rules we could, made by a company called Stadler. And we just put scale rules around everything from nameplates to visiting cards, everything. And what happened was every time Raymond would go in and see an architect with the card, they would immediately rush over to a scale rule to see if it was accurate, find that it was. And I wouldn't say it won the project every time, but it helped them to win a lot of work. Rushing on, most seed packaging, Carter's were huge, probably the dominant seed producing company in the country. They spoke in gardening jargon. Unless you were a gardener and an experienced gardener, you would have no idea what they were talking about. So the main thing in this, apart from having to illustrate these, because you couldn't photograph 200 different plants because they didn't grow at one time at one season. So that's why we went to illustration, and we had to find, I think we had 24 illustrators, and find some sort of common feeling in the quality of the illustrations. But the main thing with Carter's was the use of language. The plants are strong and bushy and grow 1.5 feet high. No seed pack told you much about what was going to happen with the seeds. So there were 200 paragraphs written by a chap called Terence Griffin, terrific writer. It was a massive, massive job, but it suddenly made them amenable and friendly and telling the truth to people instead of burying themselves in jargon. So this is just a small selection, but there were 200 packs, 200 illustrations. It was quite a mighty project. I don't have to say very much about this one, except that it took 4 weeks to decide whether we would have the whole apple on both sides, half an apple on each side, or half on one side and a whole on the other, which didn't really make sense. But because they liked the photograph so much, they went for this, and we couldn't really dissuade them. I think I would have had half an apple on each side, or a whole apple on each side. But anyway, that was that. This was for a venture capital company that used to be called Freedom from Infection. FFI, Finance for Industry, which people confuse with Freedom from Infection. And it happened, the company was created after World War II because it was very hard for new enterprises to get any investment at all. So the 5 major banks set up this company called Finance for Industry. And because it wasn't finance so much as investment, we proposed the name Investors in Industry, which they accepted. And because Investors in Industry, each name starts with an I, we went to 3I. The most interesting thing about this company was they had a brilliant CEO, which I could talk about him for minutes and minutes, and I got to hurry. But what I asked him was, what are the ingredients of creating the kind of long-term relationships that you need with your clients? And he said humor. So I proposed that we would produce a calendar, big calendar, about A1 or something, A2. And this is just an indication of the kind of covers that these calendars had. But they became collectible. And it was one of the happiest projects I ever worked on, because I edited them for 24 years. And in the first 2, I went out and had lunch with all the New Yorker cartoonists at the Algonquin, which they did every day before they presented their cartoons to the New Yorker cartoon editor. And I went around America and must have met 12 of them. 2 of them became very close friends. But it was terrific fun. And the stories about it, which I can't tell you, because some people thought they were funny, some people didn't. But in the end, they trusted me. And here are 2 sort of typical cartoons. There's one little story about this. Terence Conran called me one day and said, "How did you know?" And I said, "What do you mean, how did you know?" And he said, "Well, I just got kicked out of Storehouse, and the cartoon you had on that week, was every week, was a beggar sitting on the pavement with the sign saying, 'I lost it all on expert advice,'" which was Terence's idea of what had happened to him, and probably true. Okay, just hurtling along. When you have a brand as emotionally provocative as Jaguar, I don't think you have a plastic Perspex sign with the word Jaguar written on it. So it wasn't difficult to persuade Jaguar that the Jaguar itself was the epitome of their brand, and that the dealership should have leaping Jaguars. And they did it for a while, then it cost too much and they stopped. But I thought it was a good solution at the time, which is why I'm showing it to you. Very quickly, these guys were fundraisers. They were run by a chap called Ian Moore. And I thought, Moore, yes, that's a good phrase for a fundraising company. So we changed their name to Moore, and they had a lot of fun with more time on watches and more this and more that and more the other. I must have probably in the end bored people rigid, but they still using it, and it's worked very well for them. Finally, I don't know how many minutes I've been talking, probably too many. This is for a Russian bank. And it's a Russian bank that specializes in small loans at relatively low at relatively low interest rates, which is strange in Russia because the interest rates are absolutely exorbitant. And they were called Sun Credit or Life Credit. And I thought that was a silly name because basically what they were doing, they had branches all over Russia. The people who worked in the branches did deals with the people who wanted to borrow some money to pay for really very ordinary things, like getting a motorcycle repaired. Otherwise, this bloke couldn't get to work. very, very ordinary things, quite small loans. But these guys were called credit managers, which I thought was a rather frightening name, and we changed it to advisors. But these advisors really went into business with their clients to get money from the main bank. So I thought, well, I think we should call them Let's Go, because the loan enables people. I'm going to get the motorcycle mended. I'm going to get this new kitchen equipment. I'm going to get whatever it is I wanted. So the name is Russian for Let's Go, which is Payjom. And it came to my mind because my family were Russian. And when I was 5 years old, 6 years old, my dad tried to take me to kindergarten. When I say tried, I didn't want to go. And he did this trick of walking me towards the door, putting his arm around my shoulder, and he would say Payjom, which means let's go. And the next thing I knew, I was walking to school. So I knew the word had some momentum to it. And I proposed it to the bank, and they used it. But there's two other things about this client. One is that the interiors of their bank were all very domestic. The reason why, we did quite a lot of research and found that people enjoy or talk more seriously about money in their kitchens than they do in offices. So we wanted to get a sort of domestic flavor to the brunches, and we used traditional folk art that represented the kind of folk art of the region. You know, Russia is the biggest country in the world, so many, many regions, many styles of folk art, and we got folk artists to come into the branches and paint these extraordinary murals. And these are the guys that I work with. You can see how cheeky they were. The project involved consuming enormous quantities of vodka. I'd never known what it was to wake up drunk, but with this client, it happened to me in a city called Pearl. Anyway, so it was a very domestic feeling. And in their promotions, we tried to persuade them, and succeeded, only to use real photographs of real people. So there were no fake photographs. All the photographs were true. There was nothing that was trying to make an impression of one sort or another. I think this is a fantastic picture. I can't remember the name of the photographer, but it's a great picture to my mind, as is this one. I mean, these guys are just Russians, and that's what they look like. And some of the pictures were of actual people who had loans. I'm going to show you one in a moment, because the print that we did for them, the brochures we did for them, were only short stories and real photographs. So there was no promotional print. It was just a story of a situation like this one, where this woman, who was in her 80s, borrowed something like £100 in rubles in order to mend her son's motorcycle, because otherwise he couldn't get to work. So I think that's an example of the truth, if you like. It wasn't persuasive photography, it was the truth.
This is really going to be a talk about talking, and it's about audiences and what I've learned about them over throughout my career, about the different types of audiences that I've learned to work with and to talk to. And sort of coming to realize that the graphic designer's role, i.e. my role, always changes depending on the audience. And all the while you're trying to remain true to the subject of whatever message it is, because you're just translating a message for whichever audience. And the realization that graphic design, in trying to translate, blends an absolute truth with an ideal in order to deliver a truth that is communicable. So I'm going to talk about a number of different types of audience, and I'm going to start with a partisan audience. This is where I started, by talking to partisan audiences, where the audience is really quite niche, tribal even. And so it's kind of, I can't give a talk without showing this record sleeve, which I designed when I was at college, but I'm not going to talk about it. It's 43 years old, but it remains a reference point for people. Suffice to say, I designed a lot of record sleeves. I had a long, successful career designing record sleeves. And today you're going to escape with just seeing two. The previous one for Buzzcocks and this one for Duran Duran. Now, this one is from 1982, and it still gets a lot of attention. It probably gets more attention than almost any of the record sleeves I've designed. But in reality, I wasn't, to be honest, I wasn't that interested in just designing record sleeves. What I really liked doing was things like this, where you take the record sleeve and you play with design and structure of a sleeve and all the related components. I also like the idea of exposing the process. So in the middle is the carrier bag that my first record album sleeve design came in, and it doesn't have the name of the record. It's just kind of talks about the reality of the manufacturing process, the catalog number, and the fact that really the industry looks at records as product. I also quite like the idea of looking at subverting, if you like, the language of commerce. And so our advertising for records always went down a different avenue rather than just showing pictures of the pop group. And really what we were doing is beginning to create, much like Michael just talked about in branding in the commercial world, it was all about creating, if you like, defining a visual world for bands like Duran Duran to operate in. And for Duran, we worked with them for, I don't know, God knows how many years, and producing everything from the record sleeves through to, here you see the board game, which we had great fun actually designing the game and all the pieces, etc., etc. Anyway, you kind of know that something is successful when this happens. This is just some of the parodies of the Rio sleeve that I've seen over the years. I particularly like that one with Rio Ferdinand, bottom right. Apparently he's a footballer. I don't know. I'm not really into football. Anyway, towards the end of if you like, a quite intense period, I was invited to design a monthly magazine, and in 1981. So I began working with the writer and magazine editor Casper de Graaf, and I still work with Casper to this day. Somehow we still like one another, and we still really enjoy our working relationship. But together, well, working with Casper, I began to get a better understanding of how language and image are inextricably interconnected. We both understood that whilst he was a writer, we understood that words are images, and I was a designer working with images, but I understood that images were language. And in order to create this magazine month on month, the studio I had, or the people I worked, I had working around me, which were just a couple of people, suddenly started to expand. And so throughout the 80s, I just want to talk very, very briefly about when the audience varies from client to client, and as Michael said, is open to persuasion. And if I'm honest, these types of clients and audiences didn't often motivate me so much. And so now I'm just going to sum up what effectively was a 40-year career in just one slide. And there it is. I was going to try and show you a snapshot of work by just Googling my work and seeing what came up. But this is my company's profile, assorted images on Discogs instead. So suffice to say, from early 1980 through to the early 2000s, I've worked first with Assorted Images, a design studio with, I counted up 16 designers, senior designers we had over the years. I never sought to create a studio that was a mirror image of myself. I always wanted to work with designers who did something different. So all these designers, some of whom you see listed on there, had very different approaches. This led on to me forming AMX, which is one of the first of a new wave of digital studios in Shoreditch at the beginning of the 90s, and that saw me through to the beginning of the 2000s. Which brings me to a period I spent working throughout the 2000s where the audience was universal, or in other words, the audience is everyone. So I'd gone from a very niche audience. So the audience for the first early audiences for Buzzcocks were like numbered in the hundreds. And then with a project like looking at all the information and redevelopment of information systems for a bus company for a city, it's really your potential audience is anybody who might be there, who might want to get on a bus. And I came to realize that you have to do as much work, hard work behind the scenes to prepare audiences as the project progresses. because things don't change overnight. All the buses don't change, all the bus stops don't change, all the bus signs don't change, all of the pieces of literature don't change. But it takes a number of years for this to happen. And we created this diagram as much for the people working at Dublin Bus as it was for anybody else, to explain that the things that were taking place. So it was as much for the clients as it was the end user. Around that same time, I was part of the team that looked at you will, if you live in London, you will have seen these walking maps for London, and this is I started to understand how you address the amount of information to provide, especially when you don't know specifically who you're going to talk to, because again, the audience could be everyone, could be any nationality, any age, any level of ethnic diversity, any level of infirmity. So what we came to realize is that too much information is as bad as no information. You know, a telephone directory obviously has every phone number you might need, but unless you've got some kind of filter, it's kind of useless, because you need to be able to find just the one you want. Likewise, we started to look at filtering information about finding your way around on foot in London. And so how you connect information and how you connect information from one place to another. I could talk all day about this, but I won't, because I realize I've only got 2 minutes left. I want to show you quickly. Sometimes the job is as simple as stating the obvious. Anyone who's kind of landed at, say, Stansted Airport, as it is here, the point of this is that we needed to convey to people that although you've landed, you're not there yet. And so stating the obvious, that there is a border. This was a presentation to the Home Office. That was the total presentation, 2 images. This is what you need to do. You need to put up a sign saying you're not here yet, here's the border, and then begin to use that as providing information. So within 6 months, it was looking like that. A lot of my clients now are community clients, where the audience has the voice, and graphic design helps the community to share information with itself. So it's a different niche, but it's communal and it occupies a shared space. And so, you know, I work with all sorts of festivals, dance companies, schools, design communities, conferences, community groups, celebrations, activists. Audiences are diverse, but they each have a different message to deliver. The community is the audience. And that, with that in mind, we set up in 2013, we set up Design Manchester as a community to create a platform for young designers, students and professionals to encourage critical thinking, critical design thinking, a platform for awareness, engagement and interaction. And this is a shot taken in the town hall. I think this might have been the second year, not the first year, but it's sort of grown rapidly from one event over the past 7 years to last year, over 70 events in 2 weeks in venues all over Manchester. This year is going to be something different, obviously, because, well, the events are going to be like this one. The last thing I want to talk about, and I want to scare you basically, I wanted to talk about when the audience is both simultaneously universal, i.e. it's potentially everyone, but it's niche, and it's about filtering information, which is where we find ourselves now. I've always been enthused about digital media, but now many of the creators of social media tools are saying that we face real existential threats because of it. Technology has the ability to bring out the worst in society. Information is now targeted and addictive, and it's often indistinguishable from propaganda. We've long been under the threat from the right-leaning mainstream media, like the Daily Express, and they're serving a relentless supply of misinformation. And now social media delivers customized and focused misinformation, both commercial and political, to sell more ads or get more votes. We don't have time to go into detail here, but I urge you to watch. There's a film called The Social Dilemma, just released on Netflix. I watched it over the weekend. I watched it twice. It's fantastic and scary. Which brings us on to you. What, you know, I want to end with when the audience and you are the audience, you are the voice, giving an audience its voice, and in this case, the voice of protest. So I can't solve the world's problems, not on my own, but what I believe is I can be part of and promote a program of awareness that counters the worst excesses of misinformation, which is where the phrase "yours truthfully" comes in. This was a project we did. I was invited to curate an exhibition in virtual reality for Shangri-La, which is the protest stage at Glastonbury. There was no Glastonbury this year, so there was no outdoor stage. And so we created an indoor stage, and we invited, well, I think we had over 80 submissions from artists and designers to talk about truth. And this is a blatant plug for this year's Design Manchester, because we're going to revisit this stage over the weekend of 14th of November at the DM20 Festival. But I'll quickly run through some of the fantastic work. This one from our host, Morag. And the themes were freedom, truth, and justice. And we had some fantastic submissions. I particularly love this one and this one. So it's all about the truth and nothing but the truth. So in summary, I guess all I wanted to say today is audiences are invariably quite different. They have different needs and constraints, and that's the challenge of graphic design. But I believe graphic design has a responsibility to speak honestly to those audiences, but information is always contextual, as Michael touched on, and truth is seldom, if ever, absolute. So let's talk. What I loved about, or still love about your work, is how often it uses animals to represent the character of an organization. It really does, as I kind of tried to say, it's like, I like to think of image as language and language as image, and your work at its best really brings those two things together, really encapsulates that. Have you yeah, have you, do you ever anticipate running out of animals?
No, I mean, I've done a lot of things that don't have animals. It's just that when the situation that a brand is in evokes an animal, as in Hadfields, where the brand is being literally pursued. I mean, there were people going into retailers that were selling paint saying, if you sell Hadfields paint, you won't get ours. So it was a serious warfare going on. They were really being hunted. The three giants wanted them and other small paint businesses out of the business altogether. And so that just made me think that they were like a fox. They were being pursued. And
I'd be really intrigued to see how you presented that idea of a fox, because obviously the end result, the end materials, you will have asked an illustrator to illustrate your fox, and that particular embodiment of a fox comes to represent what you're looking for. Yes. But obviously you don't have that fox illustration when you go into the meeting and you say, no. Oh, fox, and they applaud. No. So do you scribble a fox, or do you just say it's going to be a fox?
I talk about it. I talk about it. I mean, I remember, funny enough, with the Bovis hummingbird, the hummingbird represented something about Bovis, was that they were quick, they were intelligent, they were nimble, they had a lot of qualities that a hummingbird has, but basically, to be honest, I wanted that little spark of orange. And the hummingbird, because I don't think there is an orange hummingbird, but we produced, there's an artist called Ken Lilly, we produced this orange hummingbird. And the extraordinary thing was that I think we probably had something like 600 inquiries from people who work for Bovis at all sorts of levels, would we have Bovis hummingbird t-shirts? Would we have hummingbirds on helmets? And for me, the thing of people, I don't mean the thing, the idea of people liking the imagery that represents them is enormously important. You know, that just that people feel affection for what they have representing them. Because I've often worked for clients who have abstract symbols, very hard to feel affection for them. And in a way, animals were, I suppose, a sort of shortcut to having a more human, a more warm, a more affectionate relationship with what was representing that company. And so, you know, even with the Russian bank, we had a cat. And the cat, we even had short stories where the cat would demonstrate in a little booklet to children how interest works. So the cat was commissioned to get a fish for a wedding. I think something like 500 fish, but it was told to get 600 because they had to pay 100 to the river to support the life in the river. So there's always, not always, but when there's an animal metaphor that works and that is going to produce some emotion, some sense of affection, if you like, I always find myself going in that direction. I mean, most of my work hasn't got animals in it at all. No animals in the scale rules for that model making company.
So when was the first time you came up with the animal as a solution? Because I remember the Bovis hummingbird, and that was, you know, was
yeah. Well, Hadfield's was the first.
Great acclaim. Was that the first one?
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So it was very early on in my life, actually. It's a long, long time ago. But the other thing I think,
I've had success with that. I'll do some more.
Malcolm, about that was that the CEO is always crucial. Mm-hmm. The man who ran Hadfield was a witty, interested, alive to the situation person. I mean, when I presented the hummingbird to Bovis, I presented it to Keith Joseph, who had a look when I was presenting of complete incomprehension tinged with contempt. So it was a very difficult presentation. And Frank Sanderson, who was the CEO of Bovis, thank God, walked into the presentation towards the end of it and said, "What's this?" And Keith Joseph said, "It's some nonsense." He made some rude remark. Mm-hmm. And Frank said, "Well, just a moment, Keith, what is it?" And he turned to me and I said, "It's a hummingbird." He said, "That's wonderful. Are we going to have it?" So I said, "Frank, it's up to you." "Oh, yeah, we'll have it." It's very often over in seconds.
Yeah.
And it's over with a CEO who gets it. You know,
that's what I found. Unless you're working with an enlightened individual or
yes.
a team of people,
yes,
you're banging your head against a wall. I mean, yes. I've often said you can't do great work for a client that doesn't want it.
No, absolutely.
And that moment where you've really encapsulated something and it's understood by the organization being encapsulated, then you know that there's going to be a fruitful piece.
You almost make it his or hers.
Yes.
You almost make them take it on as if they'd created it.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I said I didn't want to talk about record sleeves, but that was my attitude to working with bands. For me, it was really about not just representing, not just putting a pretty picture on the sleeve and not just representing the title of a song. It was really, I worked with, say, Duran Duran. I worked with them over a number of years. And the object of the exercise was to make it feel as if, or make the work look like the fans of Duran Duran believed that Duran Duran had created it. It was so indelibly interconnected with that band that really me as a designer, faded into the background. I was anonymous, and that was always my objective. To actually.
It's really interesting. I mean, when I worked with 3i, first of all, the name was an incredible revolution for them because they were called initials, FFI. They also had ICFC. They were just initials. And
Yeah.
so 3i took enormous imagination from a great CEO who got it immediately. But the thing with that was extraordinary about 3i was the affection that they all felt for that calendar every year, and almost every cartoon. And I get people, can we have permission to use that cartoon as if it wasn't theirs? And I don't know if you remember the cartoon, but the dog barking at the orange falling off, hitting the dog.
Yes.
Then the dog barks and the whole bloody lot come down. They were just cartoons that touched reality for people. And in a way, that's a form of truth. I think a lot of what we do is a bit bewildering for people. You know,
Yes,
it's
absolutely.
a bit, we think it's the right thing to do. I don't think that it touches people really. You know, a lot of it is, well, I recognize it because it's a bus stop. But whether it makes you feel anything other than the relief that you found the bus stop, I don't know. But I would try and find some. It was Maya Angelou who made this quote, which I've never forgotten, and is always, always with me, which she said, people will forget what you said, people forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And that is a quote that's stood with me throughout every project that I've ever done. You know, it's an amazing thing that she said. Yeah.
Well, I guess the bus stop will make you feel good if you keep dry and the bus comes immediately and you get on it.
Yeah.
But an interesting thing about doing the working on the bus information in Dublin is before we came along, all of the every bus stop carried the full list of all of the buses that you could possibly get that day. And of course, the person stood at the bus stop's not interested in that. The person stood at the bus stop is interested in when's the next one coming. And so you just need to know they come every 5 minutes, as opposed to here's all of the times. And here's the other thing that was insane. And I think everybody in Dublin had got used to this because they'd grown up with it. But the bus stops told you where the bus was coming from, and not where it was going to.
Yeah.
Because all the information about the buses and departure times was controlled by the depot, and the depot would say, "I can guarantee this bus will leave at 6:05," and then once it's gone, it's not his responsibility. Yeah. So how long it takes to get to the particular bus stop you're at is anybody's guess. And so I guess the truth of that information was finding a way of giving the best possible quality information so that you have the information to take a decision. Well, it's a nice sunny day, the bus is not coming for 20 minutes, I'll walk.
That's why.
Or it's pouring with rain, thank God the bus is coming 30 seconds.
That's why all design, in a sense is service design. All of it. And I guess just this it's
not about whether it's blue and yellow and what typeface it is. It is to a degree, but only to the degree that it conveys that information quickly and effortlessly.
If you can't get to somebody right at the top of a company, even if the company's 2 people, who's passionate about what they're doing. There's this wonderful quote by a Scottish mountaineer called William Murray, which I think is a wonderful thing. He said, concerning all acts of initiative and creation, there is one elementary truth, the ignorance of which kills countless ideas and splendid plans, that the moment one definitely commits oneself, then providence moves too. And if you like, Apple is a perfect example of that, because what Steve Jobs had was that commitment, absolute commitment, and a clear vision of what he saw. I don't think many people remember this, but when Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, right at the beginning, they said their purpose was to put the personal computer in the hands of every individual on the planet.
Absolutely.
That's an amazing thing to say. And, you know, I try with all my clients, and obviously haven't had that many of them, not just one bloke, but with all the people that I've worked for, to get at the truth of what is driving them. And if it's simply to make money, I know they're not going to make money. So if it's to bring something.
Well, they may make money, but it's not going to be interesting working with them.
Well, I don't think the businesses that are just there to make money,
No.
I think they're probably at risk to some extent. You've got to have a real idea that connects with people. That's, you know, it's true for our business as well. You know, if we are there to enable people's self-expression to be more effective for them than it would be if they didn't work with us, then that's a reason to be.
Quite.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to have a question from the audience. It's Matt Ipkar. Is he around?
Yeah, this is me.
Oh,
Hey Matt, how you doing?
Pretty good. Hey guys.
Are you tuning in from New York?
Yeah, from my son's room. Well, green screen. Otherwise, you'd see Lego.
That's a pink screen.
Yeah, exactly. But my question is, and it's pretty heavy. You know, we're having our debates tonight. You guys are going through your own stuff over there. But politically, it's a pretty heavy mood here, and has been for the last couple of years. But my question is this. So great modern graphic and information design has long been the domain, not always, but it's pretty much been the domain of progressive, artsy types like the ones on this call and the ones that we all know and love, except for a brief period preceding and during World War II, when it became clear that fascist Germany and Italy very much understood the power of it and what it could do and how it could persuade people. So my question is this for you guys. As design tools and education become ever more commoditized, as it becomes easier to do, as there's less secrets and special tricks up our sleeves that we can do you fear that good design, whatever that means to you, aesthetic or just, you know, honestly good information design or graphic design, could end up persuading legions of people to join the ranks of fascism again?
Well, at this particular time.
At this particular time.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I think we're entering scary times. I'm constantly looking at our own government here and hearing things said by politicians in Parliament that I think are positive, and I think, oh, you know, and give me a sense of relief. And then there's a vote in Parliament, and suddenly everybody votes the opposite way, and so we seem trapped in a kind of an ever spiraling rabbit hole that's going down in a particular direction, and it scares the hell out of me. And as I said in my talk, I don't know what to do about it. I don't know what I can do other than at any available time say that we all should be thinking about this and doing what we can, and encouraging those who have a voice to use their voice. Michael, I don't know what you think.
Morris, the same of you. I mean, if you look in history, you don't have to look very far to see communication doing things to people or suggesting things to people that aren't a very good idea, or that are worse than not a very good idea. But I suppose I'm an optimist, really. I think that if you're a pessimist, there really isn't much hope for humanity. You know, it's all so, what happens affects us all. You know, you look at the wildfires today in California, and you think with Trump or whoever and climate change, we're not going to make it. It's very easy to have to be driven by pessimism. But I think if you're an optimist, and I am an optimist, you know that somehow or other humanity will overwhelm its own self-attack, if you like. That's what I believe. But I think it does come down to that, whether you're a pessimist or an optimist, because those things affect the way you work. Those things affect the way you are. Those things affect the way you argue your way through life, really. Yeah,
I think you're right. You know, it's very easy to get depressed, but yeah, like you are, I remain an optimist, and I guess it's my optimism and my anger that always causes me to speak out and look for ways that I can help or encourage others that are maybe more eloquent than I am or have more influence, can influence things for good.
Well, at any one time, there are magnificent, amazing things happening around our planet. There are people doing extraordinary things. There are encouraging things, inspiring things happening all around the world. And then there's pessimism and frightening things. And you know, you can edit from what is happening and what you read of what is happening, and create your own spirit and your own intentions, really.
Matt, can I turn it back to you? What do you think? Because
I think that, I mean, to bring it back to design, I am an optimist, but I think that it scares me that I used to think, even 10 years ago, that when I would look at the other side's design and artwork from an aesthetic or usability perspective, it was just terrible. And I was like, I would think to myself, great, they're not going to get anywhere. And even though we make fun of like what the right here is doing and Trump websites and the aesthetic and the gold and the marble and all that, beyond that, there's a lot of like actually very good design. And it scares me that there are people who went to design school or learned how to do it or naturally gifted at it who are doing this work. And I guess that was always the case, but maybe they were just kind of grumbling under their breath, working for, Michael Wolff or yourself. But it was just something that I've noticed over the past decade, just like it's not at all our domain.
What that makes me think is, and this is a provocation I kind of often give to design students, is what is good design? I mean, the good design you're talking about there is actually effective design, how it's, and as Michael said earlier, how it makes people feel. It's not what it looks like. I mean, I showed some covers for the Daily Express. Now, by any standard, they are aesthetically not pleasing, but they are good design because they reach a particular audience relentlessly day after day with exactly the same message. I always used to cite the Sun newspaper as good design. It's good design because typographically, the way the page in the Sun newspaper works is that you have read it before you've decided whether you want to read it or not.
Yeah.
And that is scarily good. And they know it works. And day after day, they use that power to give us information that if you fact check it, if you look at it, is, if not actual blatant lies, real misrepresentation of the actual truth. And so they're using good, bad design to reach ordinary, impressionable population.
You know, I see things where I think, my God, why did that happen? Like you were showing the airport situation with the border, big emphasis on the border. Worse than the emphasis on the word border is this group of people called border force. What a terrible use of the word force.
Absolutely. Well, if I can interrupt, we introduced the idea of calling it a border.
Yes.
It was just the UK Home Office or the Home and Immigration, and we said no, just name what it is, say what it is. Here's the border, here's a white line, you've landed, but you're not there yet. Once you get over the border, you're in, you're welcome. And so it's brutal, but it's clear. And it was only later on, when we first presented that, they resisted the idea of calling it a border. But then they kind of realized it would. And later they twisted it to say the border force. And it's like, oh God, it's making it into a fucking fascist regime after all.
Well, the word force
the intention. The choice of blue and white was very much, it's like, it's aligning itself with the police force. When back when we didn't have the police program, the police were always seen as having authority, but basically being on your side.
Yes.
They're not commercial, they're not military, and so the use of blue was specifically to try and give you that feeling.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. But no, the border. When I saw that they're calling itself the border force, I went,
Oh, I know, it's terrible.
No. Yeah.
Okay, I've got one more question, it's the last question, and Helen, it's Helen O'Brien. Would you like to ask the last question?
Yeah, thanks guys, this has been a really lovely evening. My question is around the sort of overall theme here around truths and lies. Not so much about finding yourself, but creating yourself, as you said at the beginning, and the sort of fakery of stock imagery and bought imagery. So is good design about surfacing the truths and not devising convincing masks?
Yes. In my book it is. Good design is about finding the way of conveying honest information with integrity and credibility. It's not about finding ways of telling lies in a way that makes them seem like they're truths.
Yeah, that's right. I agree. Yeah. Absolutely.
So again, design is not about it's not about typefaces and colors. It's not about enjoying those for their own ends. It's about, you know, I keep on coming back to echoing what Michael said about feeling. It's about creating the right impression and an honest impression. Yeah, so good design for me is definitely about being good, being nice to people, and not manipulating them.
If, as I find myself always saying, what's the point of your business? Well, what would you want to feel? What would you want the world? What would you want to feel as the result of you doing what you do? What's the end? What's the goal? What's the vision of the world if you've been successful? What gets you up in the morning? Why are you doing this? And unless you feel, as an individual designer, some sort of empathy with that, you shouldn't be working for those people, in my view. You know, there's no point in helping people to do something you don't think is a good idea.
I've got a client tomorrow I'm sacking.
I managed to get through this entire talk without using the word ethics, but that sounds like an ethical decision.
Well, it's a personal, you know, we all have our personal reasons for choosing things, yes. Whatever, things we buy or things we do, or things we think, or things we feel. You know, that's what I think that expression about not finding yourself, but creating yourself is so apt, because you create how you want to be, who you want to be, what you want to do in the world, what you want your life to mean to you and to the people close to you and to everybody that you touch.
That kind of sums up what my talk was meant to be about. It was like I started life being very intuitive and responsive and operating in my own little punk rock bubble. But as time has gone, I've found myself in a position where I have if you like, I feel as if I've got a mission to deliver that. I feel passionate about a certain way of working and working with a certain types of people and collaborating in a very positive and open way. And that's taken 40 years to get to.
But Malcolm, both you and I know that there are design companies who will do anything.
Yeah.
You know, so it's a choice of how you create yourself. That's why I find that expression so useful, because you've got these choices, who you want to work for, who you don't want to work for, all those things, you know, they're down to us as individuals. But thank God.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.